y'all, it's Nat. Today we are going to be talking about my most favorite queer books that I've read thus far in my reader lifespan. I will say I have not read nearly as much queer literature as I would like to. When I was going through Storygraph, only 74 of the 426 books I have marked as read came through the LGBTQIA+ filter. I will say I'm not the best at tracking my reading. This has to do with my long-standing hatred for Goodreads. I've improved a little bit since switching to Storygraph, but it is a very gradual improvement. So the numbers might be slightly off there, but I'd say, you know, probably in the general vicinity, I guess. And you know, as a queer person, I would like for that number to be much higher. It's not for a lack of queer books on my TBR, although to be fair, like until the last several years, that was the case. Like I did not have nearly as wide an array of queer books available to me, to my knowledge, when I was younger. Having said that, I really want to read more queer books and find more favorites, because I was also disappointed to go through that list of 74 books and realize that while I enjoyed most, if not all of them, very few were ones that really stuck with me. My primary reading goal this year is to read down my physical TBR, and a good amount of those are books that I've had for several years, since before queer books were super on my radar. But maybe by the end of the year I can get past the 100 mark. I do think I have enough queer books on my physical TBR to do that. And then next year we can really focus on reading more queer books. Anyways, enough of my rambling. Let's talk about my favorite queer books. I think we'll go by genre first, and then within that, the order in which I read them. We'll start with the biggest category, which is, of course, fantasy. First up, we have She Who Became the Sun by Shelley Parker Chan. This is a historical fantasy that reimagines the rise to power of the Ming Dynasty's founding emperor. It has been a while since I've read this one. I read it back in 2021. I'm definitely gonna have to reread book one in order to finally read book two, because I don't have the greatest memory. I've forgotten most of what happened in book one. I just remember little bits and pieces. But basically, this book begins with two children of the Zhu family, and the young boy is destined for greatness and the young girl destined for nothingness. But one day their village is attacked and the young boy dies. So the girl assumes his identity in order to try and escape her fate. So she enters a monastery as Zhu Chongba, a young male novice, and the story kind of goes from there. It's all about her doing whatever she can to escape her fate, and then along the way she decides to try and see if she can claim her brother's destiny as her own. It is kind of a more military fantasy, to my recollection at least, so if that's not your thing, then this might not be the book for you. I just remember really being invested in Jude's journey, and I'm definitely more of a character-driven reader. So I just thought that Jude was a really interesting character to follow, and I really loved the exploration of gender in this book, especially as somebody who is genderqueer, gender fluid, and I was very much early on in my own self-exploration of that when I was reading this book. So I loved getting to read a fantasy book by a non-binary author that was getting a lot of hype within the online book community at the time. Well-deserved hype, I think. This was one of what we called the adult fantasy sapphic trifecta of 2021, along with The Unbroken by C.L. Clarke and The Jasmine Throne by Tasha Suri. So far, this is my favorite of the sapphic trifecta. I read The Unbroken last year and I really enjoyed it, but it's not quite an all-time fave, at least not yet. I still have to continue on with the series, so it could still become an all-time favorite, but book one alone didn't quite get there. I have not read The Jasmine Throne yet, so we'll see how my final ranking stacks up. I do plan on reading it later this year, just closer to when book 3 comes out, because again, my memory's not great. I don't want to have to reread 2 books in order to read book 3 when it does come out. And I anticipate really enjoying the series. I love Tasha's series, the books of Umba duology, so I have high hopes for The Jasmine Throne. But yeah, She Who Became the Sun, I highly recommend it. I can't wait to reread it at some point this year so that I can finally read book 2 and see how the story ends. Next up we have Little Thieves by Margaret Owen. Y'all, this book is so good. I really wish we had bookshelves so that I can finally unpack my copy of this book. This is another one that I really want to reread so I can read book 2. I read this one back in 2022. It's a retelling of The Goose Girl, which I was unfamiliar with prior to reading this book. We follow our main character, Vanya, whose mother abandoned her as a child and she was raised by death and fortune. She's always lived under the threat of like having to choose which of her godmothers she wants to pledge lifelong servitude to, and she just wants her life to be her own. So for years she assumes the identity of Princess Giselle, who she served for a really long time, in order to charm the nobility and steal their jewels. Just as she's finally closing in on enough money to fund her escape from her godmothers, she crosses the wrong guide and is cursed to turn into jewels herself. The only way to save herself is to make up for what she's stolen. And then also in comes a detective who's trying to figure out who's been stealing from all the nobles, and the story kind of goes from there. This book features 2 demisexual main characters, which I loved that representation so much. I believe there's also a sapphic side couple, if I remember correctly. I loved this book, but again, I really gotta reread it to refresh my memory so I can finally read book 2. Next up, we have The City of Dusk by Tara Sim. Y'all, this book needs more hype. Not enough people are talking about this book. I will say it did take me a while to get into it. It's one of those books with an ensemble cast that, you know, again, character-driven reader, it took me a while to really get invested in the characters, but I felt like the plot was interesting enough that I wanted to give it a fair shot, and y'all, it did not disappoint. I'm just gonna read the synopsis for y'all on this one because it's kind of difficult to summarize. There's a lot going on, and again, it's been a while since I read it. The 4 realms, life, death, light, and darkness, all converge on the City of Dusk, ruled by the 4 noble houses of Nexus. But the gods have withdrawn their favor from the once vibrant and thriving city, and without it, all the realms are dying. Unwilling to stand by and watch the destruction, the 4 heirs, Risha, a necromancer struggling to keep the peace, Angelica, an elementalist with her eyes set on the throne, Tasia, a shadow-wielding rogue with rebellion in her heart, and Nick, a soldier who struggles to see the light, will sacrifice everything to save the city. But their defiance will cost them dearly. Just trust me on this one, y'all, okay? The world building is so good. Again, character-driven reader, it is so rare that the plot is what really hooks me into the story and gets me invested in the characters. It's usually the other way around. I really enjoyed this one. Next we have A Day of Fallen Night by Samantha Shannon. This is another one that is difficult to summarize because there's a lot going on in this giant tome of a book. It's also the prequel to The Priory of the Orange Tree. They're set in completely separate timelines, and this one is the prequel. So it's not like talking about the plot of A Day of Fallen Night spoils anything for Priory in any way. I just personally feel as though my reading experience was enhanced having read Priory first and like not really knowing anything about this story going into it. So yeah, I don't even really want to summarize it. I just want to say I loved every single storyline in this book. That was not the case for Priory. I also enjoyed the sapphic rep a lot more in this book. with Priory, I was really only invested in one of the characters in the sapphic relationship. I believe there were actually two sapphic relationships in Fallen Knight, and I just loved them so much more. I was way more invested in like all of the characters of the ensemble cast of this book than I was in Priory. So this is an all-time favorite fantasy book. This is an all-time favorite queer book. I loved it. I would recommend reading these in publication order. I know it's such a commitment. These are both massive, chunky fantasy books. They're very world building heavy. That's not for everybody. I personally love it. World building is one of my favorite things in fantasy books, so I really enjoyed that. But even if Priory like isn't your favorite, I think it's worth it to read that in order to get to A Day of Fallen Night. I'm like so scared that somebody's gonna read both of these books and hate them both because I told them to give it a chance, because they're a massive commitment. It's up to the individual to figure out if you want to give it a shot. I personally felt like it was worth it, and I'm excited to see whatever else Samantha Shannon writes in this universe, the Roots of Chaos universe. I believe we're on number 5 now, and this is one I can actually hold up. So we have To Shape a Dragon's Breath by Monoquill Blackgoose. Honestly, this year has been a great year for queer dragon books for me, and I'm having a lot of fun. So this follows our main character, Anakuz, who finds a dragon egg and bonds with its hatchling. Now, there hasn't been a dragon sighting on the remote island where she's from in many generations, but people who bond with dragons are revered as Nampeshawaythit among her people. Unfortunately, the English have very different ideas about humans and their relationship with dragons, and Anakuz does not meet their standards of who even deserves to have a relationship with a dragon. However, they very reluctantly allow her to attend one of their dragon schools on the mainland, and if she can't succeed there, then her dragon will be killed, and that's kind of the setup for this book. I loved this book so much. I loved Anakuz as the main character. It's interesting because she's very secure in who she is and what she believes in from the get-go. She's determined not to compromise any of her values just because people at the school expect her to do things the English way. This book doesn't have her struggling as much with internal conflict as external conflict. I wouldn't say there isn't any internal conflict. It's just not the main driver of the plot so much as the external threat of the English imposing their ways, their beliefs on her and the dragon she bonds with. And typically it's very difficult for me to get invested in a story that's mainly driven by external conflict. Y'all know I'm a character person. How many times have I said it in this video alone? Inner conflict is usually a lot more engaging to me personally, but I mean, I've said it already. I loved this book. It wouldn't have made the list if I didn't really enjoy it. I loved how, Anakuz would be confronted by, some English custom or way of thinking that made absolutely no sense to her, and she'd just be like, no, I don't want to do it that way. Like, the way y'all do things is weird to me. I love just how she's not like static as a main character. She's just solid. I can't quite find the word I'm looking for. She didn't need to have a lot of inner turmoil for me to find her and her journey in this book very compelling. Just the way that her as she is so interesting to me, and I don't need her to change. I love her as she is. But yeah, I loved her. I loved the dragons, obviously. She does form her own little found family while she's at this school, and I loved that as well. I can't really say much else about it without getting into more spoilery territory. Just go read this book. It's so good. I can't wait to see how the series continues to unfold. I don't know how long the series is going to be. I hope it's long. I want to follow this character for several more books. Okay, y'all, we have another sapphic dragon book called So Let Them Burn by Camilla Cole. This one is actually a 2024 debut, and I loved it so much. And I'm so glad I pre-ordered a copy because it came with this really cool foiled art print of the main characters. And my copy is signed and personalized, so I love that. This is a YA Jamaican-inspired fantasy following two sisters in alternating POVs. We have Farron, who has made a name for herself among her people as somebody with the ability to channel the power of the gods. About 5 years ago, this ability helped her liberate her island from the Langley Empire and their dragon riders. Now she's forced to attend a peace summit, and she's just expecting to have to show off her powers to everybody and then go home. However, her older sister Alara ends up forming a bond with one of the Langley Empire's dragons. And now the gods are telling Farron that the only way to break that bond is to kill Alara. So Farron is desperate to find another solution, and Alara is having to deal with the whole forming a bond with the dragon thing, which is very much a fish out of water situation for her. And yeah, I loved this book. I loved the world building. I loved the sisters' relationship. I can't wait to read book 2. If there is any 2024 debut that y'all need to read, it's this one. I'm telling you. Are we on number 7? The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet by Becky Chambers. This is a cozy sci-fi that is just so queer. I honestly don't know what else to say about it, because what else could you possibly need to know? No, but it follows Rosemary Harper, who has just joined the very diverse crew of the Wayfarer in order to escape her past and explore the galaxy. They end up getting offered a dangerous but lucrative opportunity tunneling wormhole through space to a different planet. Along the way, they face challenges that force the crew to learn how to rely on one another despite how different they all are. So the Wayfarer series is one of those series that follow completely separate stories, just with kind of connecting characters. I enjoyed the whole series, but book 1 is by far my favorite. I just loved how queer it was. I loved the found family aspect of it all. It was just so good. So yeah, if you haven't read this one, definitely read it. Next up, we have a graphic novel called Mooncakes. I read this in my Deaf Awareness Month reading vlog, I think a couple years ago. And this is a cute, queer, witchy graphic novel that follows a hard of hearing main character named Nova, who works in her grandmother's bookshop, where they loan out spell books and investigate supernatural occurrences in their town. One night, she follows reports of a white wolf into the woods and finds her childhood crush, who she hasn't seen in many years, battling a horse demon. Tam has spent the last few years moving from place to place, trying to escape dark forces, eager to claim the magic of wolves, and now turns to Nova for help. So they have to work together in order to solve Tam's problems, and old feelings are rekindled along the way. It's very sweet. Obviously, I loved the hard of hearing rep in this one as well, and of course the queer rep. So yeah, highly recommend this one. Next, we have an adult romance called Trouble by Rosie Adams. I read this book for Blackathon in 2023, I think. It was for a prompt that was something along the lines of reading a book that is smutty and sex positive. Heather from Here BookTube did a recommendations video for every single Blackathon prompt of that year, and Trouble was one of the recommendations from that video. I'll link it in the description. As somebody who is on the asexual spectrum, this was definitely out of my comfort zone, but it was also the first book I'd ever read with polyrep in it, and I loved it. We follow an established married couple, Hendrix and Nova, who have always been in a polyamorous relationship, but they've never been interested in the same person until Hendrix swipes right on Sadie on a dating app, and Nova runs into Sadie, and I can't remember if Sadie spills her chai latte on Nova or vice versa, but quite by accident, Hendrix and Nova are suddenly interested in the same woman. I loved Hendrix and Nova straight from the off. Their relationship is so wonderful, so solid, and I loved seeing them navigate this new dynamic in their relationship. I do think as well, like I said, this book was very much out of my comfort zone. My interest in comfort level with muddy books definitely fluctuates over time, but in general, I have an easier time with it if I can see the emotional connection between the characters, because that gets me emotionally invested in them, and then, you know, I want them to have a good time. So having that established relationship to start with, and then watching them build a relationship with someone else, was really cool to see. And ever since reading this book, I have been like, I really want to see more diversity in relationship structures and how people navigate them in media, because I think it's lovely to see all the different versions of love in the world, you know? I definitely do want to read more by this author at some point as well. I haven't gotten around to it yet, partially because of the whole physical TBR thing, and also I just don't read as much romance as I do SFF. So at some point I do want to read more by Ridley Adams. It's just not quite a priority yet, but maybe next year. Last on my list is The Lesbiana's Guide to Catholic School by Sonora Reyes. This is a YA contemporary following our main character, Yamilet Flores, who was outed by her crush and ex-best friend at her old school. Now she's one of the only Mexican kids at her mostly white, very rich Catholic school, but at least she gets a fresh start here. All Yami wants to do now is keep her brother out of trouble, make her mom proud, and not fall in love again. That's easier said than done, however, when she meets Bo, who's the only openly queer girl at her new school, but she's determined not to make the same mistakes again. This book made me cry a lot. I went to Catholic school for my first 2 years of high school, and I was questioning my sexuality pretty much all throughout high school until I got to college, and I was like, Nat, if you've been questioning this for 4 years, there's probably a reason for that. All this to say, I really related to a lot of Yami's experiences as a queer person at a Catholic school. I loved her relationship with her brother. Y'all know I love sibling relationships in books, and their relationship specifically also made me cry a lot. Like, it wasn't just the whole queer rep of it all that made me cry. This book was just so good. I need to read the Luis Ortega Survival Club as well, because I've heard great things about that one too. Highly recommend this one for queer folk with religious trauma. So those are some of my current all-time favorite queer books. I can't wait for this list to grow and change as I read more queer books. But let me know down in the comments what some of your favorite books with queer rep are, or if you just want to leave a pride related emoji, like a rainbow, a pride flag, heart in any of the pride flag colors. That would be very much appreciated as well. I hope y'all enjoyed this video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up, and if you'd like to see more videos from me, make sure to click that subscribe button as well. Thank y'all for watching, and I'll see y'all in the next one. Bye!